"Are you really judging an old man?" she whispered as the flag rope clicked in the icy wind, before seeing the truth behind that frosted porch light. They scoffed their doubts pressed around him like cold protocol, even though he didn't answer, and still the quiet in his coat pocket held a steadier story. For inside lay a silver service coin trembling with a faint heartbeat-like pulse and a soft shift of winter light each time he turned it. "Anyway, quiet men leave echoes too, let me take you back." The wind that morning carried the kind of cold that made everything sound sharper, even the soft flap of paper against a wooden door. Harold Benton stepped out of his small garage, just as the yellow HOA notice trembled in the breeze. It clung there like it had been waiting all night for him, edges stiff with frost, a thin strip of tape holding judgment in place. Across the narrow street, 3 neighbors stood with Linda Crowley, the HOA board lead. They weren't hiding their concern. Arms crossed, hats pulled low, their breath puffed out in white clouds that drifted like small questions between them. The group didn't speak at first, but their silence pressed in with a single, unmistakable meaning. They were watching him. Linda cleared her throat. "Mr. Benton, you've accumulated quite a bit of clutter in there." She gestured at the open garage behind him, where old tools boxes of wiring and a few wooden crates sat in their usual patient rows. Harold nodded once, not defensive, not apologizing either. "Just steady." A neighbor added, "It looks like trouble waiting to happen." Another chimed in. "He keeps fixing things for people. That's not allowed, right?" Their voices overlapped, soft but insistent, like a line of cold metal being angled his way. Rules were pointed at him from every angle, and no one seemed eager to lower them. Harold looked down at the notice. The printed words, "Violation, unauthorized activity, liability," blurred slightly, as a gust pushed the paper upward, slapping lightly against his knuckles. He reached into his coat pocket, fingers brushing the familiar cool surface of a small silver coin. He didn't pull it out. Just the touch steadied his breath. A dog barked 3 houses down, breaking the moment. Somewhere nearer, a porch swing creaked as the frozen board settled. The neighborhood felt tight, as if winter itself had leaned in to listen. "I'll take care of it," Harold said quietly. Linda hesitated. "We just need to make sure everything is safe. Regulations exist for a reason." He didn't disagree. He didn't agree either. He simply folded the notice once, then again, until it was small enough to slip into his pocket beside the coin. His fingers rested there, the metal reassuring beneath the thin paper. The neighbors exchanged glances, their suspicion lingering. One of them muttered, "Doesn't say much, does he?" "Never has," another replied. "Hard to know what's going on with him." Harold stepped back into the garage and eyed the row of tools along the wall. Quiet things worn by years of use, not danger. A small radio hummed softly in the corner, an old tune drifting through static, warm and familiar. He set the volume a little higher, letting the low notes fill the space like a simple reminder that not everything in life had to be loud to be steady. Outside, the wind lifted again, pushing the door slightly. He took hold of the handle, pausing one brief moment as the cold brushed his face. Their eyes were still on him, curious, uneasy, misreading the man who rarely explained himself. But he simply lowered his eyes and nodded. Ellie Harland first noticed Harold that morning when she rounded the corner of Willow Street, and saw him standing on a neighbor's porch, sleeves pushed up, tightening a loose hinge on an old storm door. The snow on the steps hadn't been cleared yet, and the cold bit at her skin. But Harold worked with the same calm, steady rhythm he always carried, as though winter had no say in the matter. The neighbor thanked him, offering a smile before retreating inside. Harold simply nodded and started down the steps, moving with the careful patience of someone who had fixed 1,000 little problems across 1,000 quiet days. Ellie followed at a distance, pretending to check her phone as he crossed toward another house. A boy's bicycle leaned on its side near the curb chain, half off, one pedal frozen stiff. Harold crouched down, tested the wheel, and reached into his coat pocket. Ellie slowed as she watched him pull out a small silver coin. Not to spend, not to show, just to use. He placed the edge of it beneath a stubborn screw on the pedal, turning it with a measured, practiced motion until it clicked loose. "That's not a tool," Ellie murmured to herself, but something in the way he handled it made her pause. It looked like a habit formed long before this small street ever knew his name. A car rolled by. 2 HOA members sat inside the window, half down. One of them leaned out. "He's creating liability for the whole block," she said, her voice sharp with certainty. The other added, "It's only a matter of time before something happens." Their concerns lined up like cautious barrels pointed without ever needing to lift a single hand. Ellie felt a flicker of frustration on Harold's behalf, but he didn't look up. He didn't even seem to hear them. He finished adjusting the bike, set it upright, and gave the wheel a gentle spin. The spokes glittered in the winter sun. Soon after, he made his way to Miller's Diner, the small brick place on the corner where every booth had a view of the street. Ellie slipped inside a few minutes later, pretending she just happened to choose the booth behind him. Harold sat at the counter, warming his hands around a steaming mug. The waitress came by with a smile and topped off his coffee without asking. He thanked her softly and slipped a folded bill under the edge of the cup, more than the price of a refill, but he didn't call attention to it. The warmth rising from the cup drifted toward the window, fogging the glass, just enough to soften the view of the icy street outside. Ellie watched him through the haze, wondering how someone could stand so still and yet carry so much quiet motion inside him. When Harold stepped back out into the wind, the gust caught the edge of his coat, sending a swirl of snow around his boots. He walked past her without noticing she'd been watching. She waited a few seconds, then followed her breath, turning to little clouds in the cold. For reasons she couldn't fully explain, he suddenly seemed like the only person on the street who wasn't misunderstanding anyone, and the only one she wanted to understand. The community hall smelled faintly of old coffee and winter coats, the kind of scent that settled into the wooden walls after years of neighborhood gatherings. Harold Benton stepped inside and shut the door behind him, brushing a thin layer of snow from his shoulders. 5 members of the HOA sat in a straight row at the long table, their expressions tight, hands folded, waiting. The only sound came from the heating unit rattling somewhere overhead. Linda Crowley motioned toward an empty chair across from them. "Mr. Benton, please sit. We've had several concerns raised since yesterday's notice." Harold took the seat without a word. Ellie slipped in behind him, breathless from hurrying, but one of the board members blocked her with a raised hand. "This is a board meeting," he said. "Residents can observe, but they may not speak." Ellie nodded reluctantly and stood by the wall near the door, her eyes fixed on Harold. On the table before the board lay 6 thick packets of regulations, all opened to different pages. They were turned outward toward Harold, as if to ensure every printed rule faced him directly. 6 printed rule sheets were laid out toward him, like lined barrels, cold, precise, pointed. Linda tapped one of them. "We've documented several activities you've been performing around the neighborhood: fixing structures, repairing bicycles, handling electrical issues. None of these are authorized." A man at the far end added, "We don't know your background. We don't know if you're trained. These actions could expose the entire HOA to liability." Harold's gaze lowered. His fingers brushed the inside of his coat pocket, where the familiar weight of the silver coin rested, though he did not take it out. The meeting room felt heavy. A clock on the wall ticked with sharp, steady beats, marking each second, as if it were a question the board expected him to answer. Ellie watched him closely, shifting her weight, wanting to say something, but the warning look from the board kept her silent. Then the side door opened, and Mrs. Dawson stepped in with a folder pressed to her chest. Her gray hair was tucked neatly beneath a knitted cap. She offered a polite nod to the board and took a seat off to the side. Her eyes landed briefly on Harold, then on the outline of the coin through his coat. Whatever recognition passed through her expression, she kept it to herself. Linda cleared her throat. "We're here because we need to make sure everything happening on this street is within regulation. We can't have unapproved repairs or interventions. It sets a precedent the HOA can't manage." One of the men leaned forward. "This isn't personal, Mr. Benton, but rules are rules." Harold lifted his eyes. "Understood." And then the room went oddly quiet. It wasn't silence from peace, it was the kind that followed after too many assumptions had been stacked into the air. Ellie felt her heart pulling upward into her throat. Mrs. Dawson's hands tightened around her folder. The clock kept ticking steady and unbothered, marking attention. None of them had the courage to break first. Outside, the wind pushed a gust against the hall windows, and the faint rattle carried through the room, echoing like a reminder that something beyond those rules was waiting to be noticed. The storm rolled in before noon, dropping a curtain of white across Willow Street so thick it swallowed the outlines of cars and rooftops. By early evening, the lights in every house flickered once, twice, and then the whole block went dark. A low collective groan echoed from porches and windows as people stepped out, phones raised like dim lanterns in the cold. Someone shouted from across the snow-packed yard. "It's Harold." He was messing around with the lines again. He tampered with it. Another voice joined sharp with certainty. Soon the entire cluster of HOA members and 3 neighbors stood halfway in the street. Breath rising in white plumes, all turned toward Harold Benton, as if the outage itself were a verdict pointing straight at him. Ellie pushed through the small crowd. "He didn't do anything wrong." "Let the adults handle it," one man snapped. The wind tossed her hair as she hurried after Harold, who was already walking toward the utility shed near the end of the block. He moved with a calm urgency, boots crunching through fresh snow. When they reached the shed, he knelt beside the metal housing of the relay box. The storm rattled the thin walls, and the dim outline of wires shivered inside like tense strings. "What are you doing?" Ellie whispered. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached into his coat and pulled out the small silver coin, the same one she'd seen him use on the bicycle pedal. He pressed it lightly to the metal panel, closing his eyes as he shifted it from one point to another. The coin caught the faint vibrations, tiny shivers of imbalance traveling through the surface. "That's not clutter," a voice called from behind them. Ellie turned. Mrs. Dawson stood a few feet away, snow gathering on her knitted cap. A man she didn't recognize stood beside her, broad-shouldered older, wearing a faded Marine Corps beanie. His breath froze in the air as he leaned forward. The Dawson continued, her voice steady, "is a Marine Quiet Service token." The man beside her nodded. "I haven't seen one of those since Pendleton. You don't carry it unless you earned it." Behind them, the HOA members crowded closer, but none dared interrupt. Their eyes tracked Harold's movements with a new kind of unease, not accusation now, but something quieter, almost reluctant. The wind slammed against the shed, and the board's regulations pinned Harold harder than any hand ever could, every expectation tightening around him. But he kept working. He shifted the coin again, listening for the fault line hiding under the storm's noise. There he murmured. He removed the access screws, fingers steady despite the cold, and pulled the relay plate aside. Ellie held her breath as he exposed the failing junction sparks fluttering weakly like fireflies caught in ice. He twisted the damaged connector free and bridged 2 lines with a spare coupler he kept in his pocket. A sharp click echoed inside the box. Then, across the block porch, lights blinked back on one by one, glowing through the snow like small, warm lanterns. People gasped. Someone clapped a hand over their mouth. A child cheered from a window. Harold stepped back, breathing into his hands to warm them. The light from the nearest house spilled over him, softening the tight shadows in the storm. For a long moment, no one spoke. The street, the storm, and every person on it seemed to stand still, as if the glow traveling past each window were teaching them something none of their rules had ever managed to explain. The snow had softened by the next evening, leaving Willow Street washed in a dim amber glow from the street lamps. People walked slower now, not because of the ice, but because something in the air felt different, quieter, less certain, like the whole neighborhood had taken a breath it wasn't sure how to release. The community gathered inside the small town library, its wooden floor creaking softly under winter boots. Shelves stood tall and warm around them, filled with stories of people who had been misunderstood before becoming known. Harold Benton stood near the back, hat in hand, unsure why he had been asked to come. Linda Crowley stepped forward, her posture less rigid than usual. The other HOA members were lined beside her, some wringing their gloves, others staring at the floor as though the grain of the wood might offer courage. Harold Linda began, her voice steady but gentle. "We owe you an apology." A few murmurs rippled through the room. People shifted, nodding. The heat from the library furnace hummed softly behind the words. "We pointed rules at you." She paused, swallowing. "When we should have listened." Harold lowered his gaze. For a long moment, no one else spoke. The quiet filled the library like settling snow. Mrs. Dawson stepped forward next. "You saved this block yesterday. That relay could have failed completely. People could have been hurt." She held her folder against her chest, as if bracing herself for what needed to be said. "And I should have recognized sooner who you really were." From one side of the room, Ellie slipped into view. She gave Harold a small, encouraging smile. "They didn't see what I saw," she said softly. "But they do now." A man near the front cleared his throat. "We didn't know about the token. About your service." Harold shook his head. "It isn't something meant to be spoken about much." Linda gestured toward the far wall where the library board kept a display of names handwritten on wooden tiles. The list of anonymous helpers who had repaired the library roof, replaced old wiring, and restored the porch steps over the past 2 years. The crowd drifted toward it, whispering, as they noticed something they'd never bothered to see before. Several small carvings marked the bottom right corner of each tile, a simple round indentation, no larger than a thumbprint. Ellie reached out and touched one. "That's from his coin," she murmured. The realization spread slowly across the room. Every small act they had admired in anonymity belonged to the man standing silently behind them. Linda stepped aside, revealing a new plaque mounted beneath the board. It was modest, polished wood, with a brass plate centered in the middle. Engraved into the metal was a simple outline of a silver service coin catching the library's warm light. "We thought it was time the community knew," Linda said. The crowd parted enough for Harold to approach. The brass shimmered in the room's soft glow, and for a moment, the reflection of the engraved coin glinted like a warm spark beneath falling snow. The light touched the metal again, brighter this time, as if responding to a truth the neighborhood had finally learned to see. The Christmas parade drifted down Willow Street like a warm breath against the winter night. Lights shimmered along the floats. Wreaths swung gently from porch rails, and snowflakes fell slow enough to seem thoughtful. Children ran ahead of the procession boots, crunching through the soft white, their laughter echoing between the houses, newly lit with steady, restored power. At the center of the parade route, the town had placed a new bench, simple cedar polished smooth with brass fittings along the arms. A small replica of the service coin rested in a glass inset on the top rail, catching ribbons of gold from the street lamps. Folks called it the service bench, though no official plaque said so yet. People just knew. Harold Benton stood a short distance away, hands folded behind his back, watching the lights drift across the snow. Ellie joined him, bumping her shoulder gently against his arm. "You never told anyone about what you did," she said. It wasn't something that needed telling. Harold replied. From behind them, a voice rose, quiet, steady, carrying an old familiarity. A Marine veteran approached the same man from the night of the outage. His steps were slow but sure, the kind that came from years of marching and years of healing afterward. He stopped beside Harold and looked him over with the kind of recognition that didn't need words. "I remember your service logs," he said softly. "In the Corps, we called men like you a legend." Harold shook his head, but the man only smiled, patting his arm once before moving on to join the crowd gathering by the bench. Ellie's breath clouded the air as she turned toward Harold. "Is that why they say you should never corner a Marine legend?" Harold's eyes crinkled at the corners. "Legends." He let out a low, warm laugh. "They're just folks who keep showing up when someone needs them." The parade slowed as a choir float passed, voices drifting like soft bells through the cold. Children pointed toward the service bench, marveling at how the coin replica glowed under the falling snow. Neighbors paused there too, some with gratitude, some with quiet apology, all with a deeper understanding than they'd carried a week before. A gentle hush settled as the final float faded into the distance. Snowflakes gathered on the glass, covering the coin replica, layering it with a soft, white veil. Lights from the parade shimmered across it one last time before dimming into the stillness of the night. Harold took in the scene, not prideful, not burdened, just present as he had always been. The town had learned something, and now quietly it would remember. If this story moved you, share it forward. The parade lights drifted away down Willow Street, and Harold stood beside the service bench as warm laughter spilled softly across the winter air, a quiet reminder that kindness can outlast even the coldest nights. Still, the brass coin inset glowed like a small lamp in a winter window, catching each snowflake as if it were proof that steady hands and steady hearts leave a mark deeper than any rule could measure. Then Harold nodded to the neighbors, who gathered close, their softened voices, carrying the echo of lessons learned in the storm's dark hours. Quietly, Ellie stepped beside him and whispered that some folks finally understood why you never corner a Marine legend. And the replica coin shimmered once more beneath the falling snow, inviting anyone who passed to share the story forward.